Lesson for graphing equations and equations of horizontal and vertical lines. So in the first handout, you're asked to look at the equation y equals 3 to come up with a table and then to graph the equation based on the table. So let's do that quickly. Doesn't have to be a big table. So, how do I plug in my x here? Where is my x in the equation? As we've discussed before, we can think of this as having a 0x term. A 0x term. So if we plug these in, we're just going to get y equals 3. We do that for anything, we're still going to get y equals 3 all the way down. So another way of thinking of it as it's telling us the output is always 3. Always 3. So the graph of that is just going to look like this. We've already seen this several times in our class. I've pointed out how I think it's strange that this lesson comes so late in the curriculum when we've seen this several times and y'all have all grasped it pretty easily. All right, so I'm going to write some observations now. So it is the outputs are always 3. It is a linear function. The slope is 0. So we see that here, or if we come over here, we can see that the difference between the outputs is a constant 0, even though we have a +1 over here. That would make our slope equal to 0 over 1. And that reduces to 0. All right, a few more observations. As the inputs increase by 1, the outputs increase by 0. That's just slope. The y-intercept is 3. The graph is horizontal. Parallel to the x-axis. All right. So these are the major observations that we've made. So parallel lines for those of you who don't remember that, are two lines that never meet. Okay, these lines go on forever. They never meet. You can think of the analogy of train tracks. And you can see that these two lines here will never meet no matter how far they're extended. They'll never cross at any point, so they're parallel. And parallel lines also go in the same direction, but that's not too much as important, okay? So now in your notes, I want you to come up with your own equation that is parallel to the x-axis, okay? Pause it if you want, or I'll give you a second, but I'm going to come up with my own. So the next one is y equals -2, okay? Just a small table. It's always going to be -2, okay? So we get this line, and it's also parallel okay? So all horizontal linear lines are y equals. So why do we think, sorry, go away. So why do we think this produces a horizontal line? All right, so it produces a horizontal line because the outputs are constantly staying the same, okay? This means the line never moves up or down. And that's just another way of thinking of having a slope of 0, okay? So now we're gonna try to imagine the other case, something that's parallel to the x-axis, the y-axis. All right. So, before we were finding lines parallel to this, now we want to find it parallel to this. So, this is a line that would be parallel to the y-axis. Okay? And it's vertical. The other was parallel to the x-axis and horizontal. Okay? Now, what do we think the equation looks like? What does the equation look like? Some of you might already know it. But in order to do it, let's come up with a quick little table. Okay. So let's start with this point. X is 2, y is 0. Next one. 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4. Okay, so that's these points here. So we have a rate of change of what? We have an undetermined slope. So what do we do with an undetermined slope? I mean, we've drawn it, so we know it can be drawn, but does it mean, without a slope, does it mean we can find an equation? Okay, so we can still find an equation without this slope. Okay, so let's just we kind of ran into a dead end, right? So let's just ignore the weird slope. Just ignore it. Know that that's what the slope is, but don't pay too much attention to it. But what do we notice about the x's? The inputs are always 2, or the x is always 2. Okay? The x is always 2. So in our previous ones, we saw that y equaling 2 meant it would be a line like this, where every y is 2. So in this case, we're going to say x is equal to 2. Okay? So for vertical lines, it's x equals a number. For horizontal lines, it's y equals a number. And that number corresponds to either the input or the output, respectively. So x equals 2. X equals 2 produces a vertical line because the x value, or horizontal value never changes. So the x value never moves left or right. Okay? So at this point, you should have enough info to move on to the handout.